The rain had not stopped all morning when I walked into the small shop on the corner of Finchley Road. My shoes were wet, and my hands were shaking from the cold. I had not eaten since the night before, and I had less than 5 pounds in my pocket. The bell above the door made a small sound when I entered, and the smell of fresh bread filled the air. I looked around the shop and saw shelves of milk, vegetables, and simple things for everyday life. It felt old, quiet, and warm, like a piece of another time. Behind the counter stood an older woman with silver hair tied neatly at the back. Her face looked tired, but there was something kind about her eyes. She was counting coins and writing in a small notebook. When she saw me, she gave a small smile. I did not want to speak because I did not have a reason to be there. I only wanted to stand inside for a few minutes to escape the rain. Still, I felt her eyes watching me, and I felt ashamed. After a moment, I took a loaf of bread and held it in my hand, pretending to think about buying it. That was the first time I saw Miriam Bober. I did not know then how much she would change me, or how much I would hurt her before I learned what kindness really meant. At that moment, I was only a hungry and lost woman trying to stay warm in a city that did not care. For most of my life, I had been running. My mother died when I was 15, and I left home soon after. My father drank too much, and our flat never felt safe. I went from job to job, cleaning rooms, waiting tables, packing boxes. But nothing lasted long. I made mistakes, too many of them. I trusted the wrong people and sometimes did things I was not proud of. In London, I thought things would be different, but they were not. The city was fast, full of noise and strangers. It swallowed people like me. By the time I met Miriam, I was sleeping in a small hostel room with 2 other girls who never spoke to me. When I looked at the loaf of bread, I thought about taking it without paying. My stomach was empty, and the idea came like a shadow in my head. But something in her eyes stopped me. There was no anger or fear there, only quiet patience. I put the bread back on the shelf and turned to leave. She called out softly, asking if I was looking for work. I froze. I had not expected that. I turned around slowly and nodded. She said she needed someone to help for a few hours a day, cleaning and organizing shelves. It would not pay much, she said, but it would be honest work. I did not understand why she asked me. I was a stranger, a wet girl with tired eyes and no reason to be trusted. Still, I said yes. That was how it began. How I became the assistant in the little corner shop that smelled of bread and dust and something warm I could not name. The first days were difficult. I was slow, and my hands were not used to steady work. Miriam spoke little. She worked from early morning until late evening, always moving, always counting. The shop was old, and business was not good. Most people went to the new supermarket across the street where prices were cheaper. Sometimes we stood for hours without a single customer. Miriam never complained. She said that life was not about what we lost, but what we still had the strength to do. I did not know what she meant at first, but I liked how calm her voice was when she said it. I began to learn small things: how to stack the fruit so it looked fresh, how to wipe the windows to catch the light, how to smile when customers came in even if I was tired. I had never known work that felt so quiet. so simple. Yet at night, I felt something heavy inside me. I still carried the guilt of what I had done before. I had once helped a man steal money from a cafe where I worked. He said we would share it, but he left with everything. I lost the job and told no one. Since then, I had promised myself I would never do something like that again. But sometimes, when I saw the till open and the coins inside, a voice whispered that nobody would notice if I took a little. I hated that voice. It made me feel like I was still the same person I wanted to leave behind. Miriam's husband had died years ago, and her daughter lived far away. She was alone, but she did not seem sad. Every evening she gave me tea before I left, even when there were few sales. She never asked about my past or where I came from. She treated me as if I was someone she could believe in, and I did not know how to accept that. Sometimes I wanted to tell her everything, to confess the lies, the mistakes, the shame. But I stayed quiet. Kindness was new to me, and I did not trust it. One evening, after a long day, I saw her sitting behind the counter, holding a photograph. I saw the picture of a man and a young girl in her hands. Her eyes were wet, but she smiled when she noticed me looking. She said it was her husband and daughter. She missed them, but said life must continue. I wanted to say something comforting, but my words felt small. I only said that the bread was ready to come out of the oven. She thanked me and stood up slowly. That was how we were. Quiet, working side by side, sharing silence instead of stories. After a few weeks, I started to feel part of the place. Customers began to recognize me. An old man came every morning for milk and asked how my day was. A young mother often smiled when I helped her carry her bags. The shop began to feel like a home. I arrived early, cleaned carefully, and tried to learn how to do everything right. But sometimes, at night, when I was alone, the old fear came back. I was afraid that something good could not last for me. Life had never given me gifts without taking them away. The day that changed everything was cold and gray. The wind came through the cracks of the door, and the shelves were almost empty. Miriam was tired and said she needed to rest for a while. She left me alone in the shop for the first time. I looked around at the small place that had given me food and work. My hands were cold, and my stomach ached with hunger. The till was open because she had been counting change. I could see the notes and coins inside. My heart started to beat fast. I told myself I would only take one note and return it later, but another voice inside said that once I touched it, I would never be able to give it back. I stood there for a long time fighting the thought. Then the door opened. A man in a dark coat came in. His face was rough, and his eyes moved quickly. He asked for cigarettes, and when I turned to get them, I heard the sound of coins falling. I turned around, and he was reaching into the till. I froze. He looked at me, smiled, and ran out of the door before I could move. I ran after him, but he disappeared into the street. My hands were shaking, and I felt cold again. I knew Miriam would think I was part of it. I knew what it would look like. I wanted to cry but could not. When she returned, I told her what happened. She looked at me for a long time, and I could not read her eyes. She said only that bad things happen even to good people and that we must keep going. That night I could not sleep. I lay in bed thinking about her face, about the shop, about the man who stole from her while I stood there. I hated myself for not stopping him. I thought about leaving London again, running like I always did, but something inside me wanted to stay. For the first time in my life, someone had given me trust, and I wanted to deserve it. I decided that I would work harder, that I would help her rebuild what was lost. I did not know then how difficult that promise would be to keep, or how deeply I would come to care for her. That was how my story began. A small shop, an old woman, and a young girl who had done too many wrong things but was beginning, at last, to learn what goodness felt like. Before I continue with the story, please like, subscribe, share, and let me know in the comments where you are listening from. Your support means a lot. Now, let's continue. The days after the robbery were quiet. The shop felt different, as if the air inside it had changed. Miriam still came every morning at 7, still opened the blinds, counted the coins, and baked the bread. But something in her movements was slower, and something in her face had become tired. She never said that she blamed me, but her silence was heavier than any words. I tried to work harder to show her that I cared, yet every time she looked at me, I felt my chest tighten. I could not stop thinking about how I had failed her. I went to the police station on my own and told them what had happened. I gave them the best description I could remember of the man, though it was not much. They said they would look into it, but I could tell they did not expect to find him. The city was too big, and people like him disappeared easily. When I told Miriam that I had gone, she only nodded and said it was good that I tried. Then she smiled in a quiet way that made me want to cry. I knew she had lost more than money that day. She had lost a little of her hope. In the evenings, I stayed longer at the shop to clean and organize things. I wanted to make the place look alive again. Sometimes I would find her sitting behind the counter after closing, looking through old notebooks filled with numbers. She would sigh and say that business was getting worse. I asked if she had thought about closing the shop, but she shook her head. She said she had spent her whole life there, and she would stay as long as she could stand behind the counter. I admired her strength, but I also felt afraid for her. The world outside was fast and cruel, and she was small and old and still trying to keep her place in it. One morning, I arrived early and found her standing outside. She was holding a small bag of fruit and looked pale. I took the bag from her hands, and she said she had not slept much. Her voice was weak. She said she had been thinking about her husband and the years they had worked together. I did not know what to say, so I just stayed beside her until she opened the door. That day she moved slowly, and I realized she was not well. I told her to go home and rest, but she said the shop needed to stay open. So I worked while she sat behind the counter, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that she never finished. It was the first time I began to feel protective of her. Before, I had only thought of myself, my needs, my fears. But watching her push herself through pain made me feel something new. I wanted to help her, not just because I owed her, but because she was the first person who had ever believed in me. The thought of losing her made me feel a kind of fear I could not name. Weeks passed, and the police never called. The man who had stolen from the till was gone, and we were left with the small losses he caused. Some customers stopped coming. They said it was safer to buy from the supermarket. Others stayed loyal. They said they liked Miriam's kindness and my smile. Those small words gave me strength to keep going. I started baking extra bread to sell at a discount, and some people began to notice. Slowly, a few new faces appeared. Miriam said it was good to try new things, even when life was hard. I began to believe her, but the guilt I carried still followed me everywhere. I kept thinking about that moment when I had hesitated, when I could have stopped the thief but didn't. It felt like a mark I could not wash away. One evening, when I was alone in the shop, I opened the till to count the coins for the day. As I looked at the money, the memory of my past mistake came rushing back. The cafe, the stolen cash, the feeling of shame. My hands began to shake. I told myself I had changed, but deep inside, I wondered if I really had. I closed the till quickly and locked it. I promised myself that no matter how poor I became, I would never again take what was not mine. One Sunday afternoon, I went to visit Miriam at her flat. She lived above the shop in a small, tidy place with old furniture and soft light from the windows. The smell of bread and tea filled the air, just like in the shop. She was sitting on the sofa with a blanket over her legs. She smiled when she saw me. I cleaned the kitchen and helped her make dinner. It was the first time she told me about her daughter, Ruth. She said Ruth lived in Manchester and worked as a nurse. They did not see each other often because Ruth had her own life and family. As she spoke, I could hear both pride and sadness in her voice. I wanted to ask why they were not closer, but I did not. I only listened. That evening, when I left her flat, the sky was pink and gold. I felt peaceful for the first time in many weeks. I thought about how strange life could be. 2 months ago, I was alone, hungry, and lost. Now I had a place to go every morning, someone to care for, and a reason to keep trying. I wanted to protect that life, no matter what it took. Then one night everything began to fall apart again. Miriam had been feeling weak all week, but she refused to rest. I found her sitting behind the counter with her eyes closed, her face pale. When I touched her arm, she opened her eyes slowly and whispered that she was fine, but I could see she was not. I called for help, and she was taken to the hospital. The doctors said she had a heart problem and needed to stay for tests. When I visited her the next day, she smiled weakly and said the shop must stay open. She said she trusted me. Those words filled me with both pride and fear. I had never been trusted with something so important before. For the next few weeks, I ran the shop alone. I woke up early, unlocked the door, and did everything the way she had taught me. It was difficult, but it gave me purpose. Some people were surprised to see me working there by myself. A few asked about Miriam, and I told them she was resting. Some of them were kind enough to leave small tips to help her with hospital bills. I kept every coin safe in a small envelope, ready to give her when she returned. Each night, I wrote down the day's earnings carefully, afraid to make even the smallest mistake. But even as I worked hard, the days felt lonely. Without Miriam, the shop seemed empty. Her quiet presence had filled the air, and now the silence made me uneasy. I began to talk to myself while cleaning, pretending she was still there to listen. Sometimes I thought I could hear her voice in my head, reminding me to check the bread, to sweep the floor, to count the change twice. I missed her more than I had expected. It was strange how someone who had entered my life so quietly could leave such a deep mark. One evening, as I was closing, a young woman came in. She was well dressed and carried a bag of books. She looked around and said she was Miriam's daughter. Her voice was sharp, her eyes cold. She said she had come from Manchester after hearing that her mother was in the hospital. I told her about the shop, about how Miriam had trusted me to keep it open. She listened but did not smile. I could feel that she did not like me. Perhaps she thought I was taking advantage of her mother. She said she would visit the hospital and that I should not worry about the shop anymore. Then she left. Her words stayed with me all night. I felt as if I had been pushed out of a home that had only just become mine. The next day, I went to the hospital to see Miriam. Her daughter was there, sitting beside the bed. Miriam looked at me and smiled. She said softly that she was happy to see both of us. I wanted to tell her that I could keep the shop running, but I saw the look in Ruth's eyes and said nothing. When I left the room, I knew things would soon change. The shop might not be mine to care for anymore. That night, I sat in my small room and cried quietly. For the first time, I realized how much I had come to love that place and the woman who had given me a chance. I thought about all the mistakes I had made in my life, and I wished I could take back every one of them. I promised myself that if she recovered, I would do anything to help her, even if she never trusted me again. Because now I understood that love was not only about being loved, it was about giving something without expecting anything in return. When I went back to the shop the next morning, the lights were off and the door was locked. I stood outside for a long time, holding the keys in my hand. The windows looked dusty and dark. I thought about how many mornings I had spent there, cleaning the shelves and smelling the bread as it baked. The street felt different without the warm light from that small shop. I wanted to open the door, but I knew it was not mine anymore. Miriam's daughter had made that clear. Still, I felt that if I walked away now, I would be walking away from the only good part of my life. I went to the hospital again that afternoon. Miriam was sitting up in bed, looking stronger. She smiled when she saw me. She said the doctors wanted her to rest a few more days before going home. I told her the shop was safe and clean and that everyone asked about her. Her eyes softened when I said that. She told me not to worry and to take care of myself too. I wanted to tell her that I would stay and help her as long as she needed me, but I could not say it in front of Ruth. I only nodded and said I hoped she would get better soon. That night, I walked around the city for hours. The streets were full of people, but I felt invisible. I thought about leaving London again. I could find another job, another room, another start. It was what I always did when life became too heavy. But when I thought of the shop, I felt something pull me back. It was more than a place to work. It was the first place where I had felt human again. I decided I would not leave, even if I had to fight for the chance to stay. A few days later, Miriam was allowed to go home. Ruth helped her upstairs to the flat above the shop. When I went to visit, Ruth was polite but distant. She said they were planning to sell the business because it was too much for her mother. I tried to explain that I could help, that I could run the shop if they wanted to keep it open, but Ruth said her mother needed peace now, not more work. I looked at Miriam, hoping she would say something different, but she stayed quiet. I could see that she was tired and did not want to argue. I left the flat feeling empty. For several days I walked by the shop each morning. The door stayed closed and the blinds stayed down. Sometimes I saw Ruth through the window, packing boxes. I wanted to knock and offer my help, but I knew she would not want it. I could not stop thinking about Miriam sitting upstairs, alone and quiet. I wished I could tell her how much she had changed me. Because of her, I had learned to be honest, to work hard, and to care about someone other than myself. I wanted her to know that her kindness had not been wasted. One evening, I saw a small light inside the shop. I went closer and saw Miriam sitting behind the counter, looking through the old notebooks again. The door was unlocked, so I stepped inside quietly. She looked up and smiled when she saw me. I told her I had been walking by every day. She said she knew I would come. She said Ruth wanted to sell, but she could not let go of the place so easily. She said the shop was part of her life, part of who she was. Then she looked at me and said she wished she could leave it to someone who cared about it as much as she did. I felt a lump in my throat. I wanted to say that I cared more than anyone, but my voice would not come. I only nodded and said that her shop had made me a better person. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said that she had always known I was not like other people. She said she had seen pain in me the first day I walked in, but she also saw something good underneath. She said that goodness was like a small flame, and that even when life tried to put it out, it could still burn again. I felt tears in my eyes. No one had ever spoken about me that way. I told her that I had done many wrong things before I met her, but that I wanted to live differently now. She reached out and took my hand. She said that was what mattered. After that night, I helped her in the shop again for a while. Ruth still came sometimes, but she stopped arguing about selling. She said the doctor wanted her mother to rest, but if she felt happy working, she could do as she wished. So Miriam and I worked together again, but things were not the same. She moved more slowly and forgot small things. I began doing most of the heavy work. Some days she sat by the window, watching the street with a quiet smile. She said she liked hearing the sounds of people passing by. It reminded her that life was still moving, even when we felt still inside. The customers started coming back little by little. Some said they had missed Miriam's bread. Others said they came because they liked how clean and welcoming the shop felt now. Their words made me proud. I began to think that maybe, if I kept working and saving, I could one day take over the shop properly. I did not want to own it for money. I wanted to keep it alive for her. It felt like a way to thank her for everything she had done. But time has its own plans. One morning, I arrived early and found the door already open. The smell of bread filled the air. I smiled, thinking Miriam had started baking early again, When I went inside, I saw her sitting in her chair behind the counter, her hands folded in her lap. She looked peaceful, as if she had fallen asleep. But when I touched her shoulder, she did not move. My heart felt heavy and slow. I called for help, but I already knew she was gone. The days that followed passed like fog. Ruth came quickly and arranged everything. She said her mother had been happy in her last months and that I had helped give her peace. I stayed quiet and did what needed to be done. The funeral was small and simple. A few neighbors came and some of the regular customers. Everyone said she had been a kind woman. I stood there listening to their words and felt both proud and broken. After she was gone, Ruth told me she was closing the shop for good. She said she was tired of dealing with it. I asked if she would sell it, but she said no, she just wanted to let it go. I offered to buy it, though I had almost no money. She smiled sadly and said she appreciated the thought, but the decision was already made. She thanked me for helping her mother and said she hoped I would find a better future. Then she gave me a small envelope. Inside was a letter from Miriam. My hand shook as I opened it. In the letter, Miriam thanked me for my help and said she had seen goodness grow in me like light through a window. She said she hoped I would keep that light alive, no matter where life took me. She also said that she had left me something small inside the old wooden counter. After Ruth left, I went into the empty shop one last time. I found a small box taped under the counter. Inside it was a silver necklace with a tiny heart and a folded piece of paper. On the paper, in her careful handwriting, she had written, "For Francesca, who learned that kindness is stronger than the past." I sat on the floor and cried. I cried for the woman who had believed in me, for the shop that had given me purpose, and for the years I had wasted before I met her. When I finally stood up, the room felt full of her presence. The shelves were empty, but the air still smelled like bread and tea. I locked the door and walked outside. The sky was gray, and rain had begun to fall again, just like the day I first walked in. I looked back one last time before walking away. Now, months later, I work at a small bakery near the river. The owner is kind, and I tell her I once learned from a woman who taught me what honesty and patience mean. Every morning when I open the shop, I wear the silver necklace under my apron. It reminds me that even when life feels cold and empty, a little kindness can bring warmth back again. Sometimes customers smile and say I seem peaceful. I tell them it is because I love what I do, but what I really mean is that I finally understand what it means to belong somewhere. When I close my eyes at night, I still see Miriam behind the counter, her gentle smile and the smell of fresh bread around her. I see the small shop that saved me and the woman who showed me how to forgive myself. I think about the first time I saw her counting coins in silence and how I almost walked away. Now I know that some moments, even small ones, can change a whole life. I was the assistant who came with nothing and left with everything that mattered. And every day, when I open the door to a new morning, I whisper a quiet thank you for the kindness I never deserved. If you liked my story, please like, comment, and share.